Welcome to Dekom, Law and Disorder.
The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Dekom's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, friendly fact followers, freaky people. Hi there, heinous haters, frenzied followers. It's Peter Dekom again for another effort at trying to deal with the world as it is, as opposed to deal with the world as people think it might be, but isn't. And today's topic is absolutely impossible. I can't do this. I'm going to do it anyway. And I'll tell you what my methodology is in a second so you understand how completely idiotic and mentally deranged I truly am. This is called the diseducation of America. And I have this, eventually when this goes to video, you will see the stack of papers that represent my research. I can barely hold it in my lap. It's so heavy. It's a very strange and miserable task I have to talk about the education in the United States. And my methodology is very simply, I research like crazy, do old world printouts. I have a lot of stuff that I've written in the past. I also print those out. And I sit down with this giant stack of papers on my lap, and I know a rough idea of what I'm going to say, but I never overplan it because that takes away my spontaneity and my profound silliness, and also allows me to raise my voice and get frenzied as I often do. So I actually wing it. I have a clock inside me, and I guess I get easily ticked off because it goes and it goes. But that's how I do this. Education is near and dear to me. This is not so much about primary and secondary education, although I'll throw some numbers out at you. The United States used to be first in reading and math back in the 1950s and 60s. That was a result of the Sputnik explosion in 1957 when the Russians launched a satellite, the Soviets, and we had nothing to compare it with. Suddenly, education, math, and STEM became absolutely essential, and the United States began to soar in technology. We blew everybody else all to hell. We were first in reading and math. Today, we're 19th in reading and 38th in math, and that's among the top countries in the world, and that is a joke. That's an embarrassment, and those are high school numbers. But we're right now in the middle of a very interesting moment in the time-space continuum, which in my mind is terrifying because what we're doing is saying, China, how would you like to be the leading country in everything? Well, we'll help you. We'll destroy our own universities. We'll do all kinds of economic craziness to make sure that there's nothing in your way from taking over the earth and dominating all forms of political, military, and economic force. Okay, it sounds like a good idea. Hey, China, cool. We're doing it. Let's talk, first of all, about what Americans think about higher education. And that doesn't mean studying while you're stoned, by the way. Here is I have a little graph in front of me. It's put together by Gallup, which does these inane polls almost consistently. Back in 2010, that doesn't seem so long ago, but when you look at the numbers, we are way back. 70% of Americans actually thought there was a value to education, higher education, actually calling it, very important. Cut to 2025, when Americans basically look at education, maybe because of affordability, maybe it's because there's been a rebellion against, quote, elites. I'm not sure what that is. If you think an elite is not anyone you ever deal with, I recommend that you go to a medicine man, or a voodoo specialist next time you need medical care. But today, that number of Americans who perceive that education, higher education, is important or very important is 35%. Now, if you think that doesn't matter, you're wrong. How do we get here? Well, there's a lot of interesting intercepts in education. And one of the big ones is foreign students and immigration. Immigrants of the last 10 or 15 years have literally created 40% of the new jobs in the United States. And if you look at the CEOs of companies like Microsoft and Google, et cetera, the people running those companies are immigrants. And you think about education overseas. Let's look at India. India has something called the Indian Institutes of Technology, which make MIT and Caltech look like junior colleges. If you happen to be in the comp sci universities, there are a dozen or more of them in India now, you basically have 250,000 applications for one acceptance. Those are really long hours. I sure as hell couldn't get in. Maybe some of you can, but I'm not one of them. So what happens, though, is in India, they don't have the money to spend on linear accelerators, electron microscopes, amazing arrays of super fast computers. So all those really bright people often come to the United States to get graduate degrees. I've never met a comp sci IIT grad who, within 10 years of graduating from that university in India, was not worth at least 10 million US dollars. Let's put it this way, they are very, 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 very smart. And we are in a country right now where people with astounding advanced degrees, like Yale Law School graduate J.D. Vance, who has basically decided he hates higher education. We wish we hadn't wasted it on you. We wish we had put somebody in your spot who actually probably would have cherished that education and felt somehow maybe that was a good thing. So let's start with a couple of things that he has said. He said this a few years ago, 2021, the professors are the enemy. This is mirroring something that the wonderful, criminally inclined Richard Milhous Nixon said back in the 1970s when he was running for office. He ran so much into office that he was basically forced to resign. Well, that's not all that J.D. Vance says. He watched this wonderful guy, Orban, who is, Viktor Orban is the Prime Minister of Hungary, and he led Hungary into one of the most severe right-wing autocratic transitions from democracy to autocracy we have seen in the modern era. He managed to say, okay, the first guys who go are media, number two are professors, and here's what I guess our lovely J.D. Vance said. The closest thing that conservatives have ever gotten to successfully dealing with left-wing domination of universities is Viktor Orban's approach in Hungary. I think his way has to be the model for us, not to eliminate universities, but to give the choice between a survival or taking a much less biased approach to teaching. Whether it's the incentives that you put in place, funding decisions that are made, and the curricula that are developed, you can really use politics to influence culture, and we should be more of that on the right. That's kind of interesting because throughout history, whether you're in Greece or you're in ancient Bologna in Italy, the reality is that professors at major universities tend to be much more liberal than conservative, which suggests that whatever you learn in the university opens your mind to accepting more variety, more differentiation, more different kinds of diversity, etc. So we're now talking, Vance talks about the wokification of schools. And he saw that basically Orban had the ticket. What do you do about the Department of Education, he said? Well, you do what Viktor Orban has done in Hungary and is basically say, you're not allowed to teach critical race theory anymore. You're not allowed to teach critical gender theory anymore. You're not allowed to do the things that get $1 of federal money or $1 of state money. In other words, the state determines what universities teach. Now, I'm not, I don't agree with a lot of the stuff. I've actually left academic programs at UCLA that I thought were, how do I say this politely? They were just damn arrogantly incorrect, and it wasn't the kind of education I wanted. So I left film school at UCLA basically because they were trying to teach me how to think and operate the way the professors and the academics in the film department thought. And I said I didn't come here to learn how to express your opinions. I came here to learn how to express mine. I went on to law school later, but that's the way it goes. So the other things that we're doing as part of our education, which is highly destructive, is culling foreign students from our student body, particularly if they're people of color. We basically say to the world, we hate DEI. We don't want race to be a criterion. Race as our criterion is evil and bad. So President Trump just announced that he's changing the admitted people that we will admit under our immigration program from 125,000 a year to 7,500 a year, with a bias in favor of white, yes, what he said, white South Africans. So I guess racism is okay if it's the race you pick. Racism is terrible if it's used against the race you pick. And if you happen to be white, I wonder why this happens. White people tend to favor white people. Well, that's kind of interesting because as you look at what's happened at Harvard after a lot of the changes that have gone on, you will find that there are a lot more Asian students, Asian Americans, and we are not looking at a lot of success in implementing this notion of DEI being evil. I mean, frankly, I don't feel so insecure that I have to say to the world, okay, I'm inferior because I'm white, therefore I don't want to be discriminated against anymore. I actually don't mind giving other people a break because I found something fascinating. People from different cultures, races, religions, throughout my life have enlightened me into other ways of thinking. They brought education to me in ways I've never otherwise would have experienced. Yes, I'm a U.S. Foreign Service bred. Yes, I lived overseas for 4.5 years as an American kid in a high school in Beirut, Lebanon. And I have to say, living in an Arab country with a lot of Christians, a few Jews, believe it or not, and a lot of Muslims, both Shiites and Sunnis, I just kind of like, that's interesting. Well, those are nice people. And they became something strange in my world. Friends. Oh no. Perish the thought that we would have friends that are from that area. The other reality about having foreign students is a lot of countries and a lot of nations will actually pay full freight for their students. And you may have noticed that high-end universities and even middle-range universities are goddamn expensive. It's ridiculous. And by the way, one of the things our friend, Mr. Vance says is we shouldn't be forgiving debts because we're encouraging the rich. I don't know how to tell you this, but when I went to college, nobody put a dime from my family, not one thin dime toward any notion of my education. I put myself through every nanosecond of education I had. I did it with work-study programs, summer jobs, loans, and scholarships. I definitely appreciated what it means to get an education. Today, I look at the tuition that kids are supposed to pay for the same education I got. It took me 5 or 6 years to pay it off after I got my final degree, who are in their 50s, and they are still paying off their student loans. We're out of our minds. There's a doctor shortage in this country. Why aren't we just saying everybody goes to medical school, but you give us 2 or 3 years of your time to work in something where we need you? Why are we even thinking about raising the price? Maybe with lawyers I can understand. Okay, I'm a lawyer and I think there are things for lawyers to do. We like to change society and screw around with it, but you know what? In the end, if there weren't lawyers to fight to do these things, all I can tell you is we'd be in a much worse world. Although I'll tell you, looking at the recent appointees by the administration, I've seen people that I wouldn't hire as backroom typists in a law firm. I have standards. And my belief is you need to care about what you do. You need to put ethics number one and competence and education in what you do next. Nothing else matters. Experience comes with time. There's no way to accelerate the experience other than dropping yourself in and committing malpractice for a couple of years while you learn your craft. But basically, competence and ethics are how I define my practice of law. And part of what I'm doing here with this podcast is trying to disseminate a lawyer's perspective on what the world looks like, what it should look like. And my fundamental premise is, look, if we can't agree on the fundamental realities, the facts, not alternative facts, there's no such thing as alternative fact, by the way. The minute it goes into alternative, it becomes a theory. If you're looking at what is, and that's how you vote, and that's how you plan your day, and that's how you plan your personal life and how you plan your educational and your career pursuits, you better be operating on, facts. What are facts? Facts are the stuff that some people hate. And what I also find is complications have led vast pools of Americans to outsource their opinions to people who are highly biased, who are trying to manipulate their way into more money and more power, and they make shit up. And that really bothers me. So that's why this series of things that are going on, this entire negative attitude of Americans and universities, higher education. And by the way, higher education doesn't have to be a university. It can be a trade school. If you learn to do something useful in trade school, like you could be a welder, or you can be a blueprint person who creates blueprints, or you basically can create wonderful things from wood. That's a very good, noble, upscale profession, compared to all the people I see as undergraduate majoring in marketing, majoring in business. And I remember talking to one of my friends who was a professor at Wharton, and I said, what do you think of the undergraduate degrees, like even at Wharton in business? He said, an MBA is not an undergraduate degree and never should be. You can't bring just that to the table. So he looked at it, and I said, well, what do you recommend? He said, I recommend nobody take a business undergraduate degree, including here at Wharton. Don't do it. Take a degree in almost anything else, but don't get an undergrad. Oh, who got a degree like that? Let me think here. Trump. That's it. That's the guy who got one of those educations. And I would kill to see his damn economics grades at Wharton, because what comes out of his mouth and economic reality are unrelated. I mean, I love the way he's done around and tried to distort things like tariffs, the impact of the Federal Reserve. Did you go to class? I have a feeling he would tell you, I didn't need to go to class, obviously. Whatever else is said and done, there's some bright people in the Trump administration. Okay, I get it. But they aren't the ones who are allowed to call the shots. Then you have people who are extremely well educated, like, I hate to say this, reservist Major Pete Hegseth, who went to Princeton undergraduate. It's a very good school. Somehow there must have been some sort of medical reality, maybe during his active alcoholic years, because the stuff that comes out of his mouth is tripe. It's wrong. And he's cutting off communication from military senior officers to the press. You can't even get into the Pentagon unless you sign a document that says you got to do whatever the Pentagon tells you should do. And he doesn't let his generals talk to Congress. And you also have a new thing now that we're bombing the crap out of people in the offshore waters and probably the lands where purported narco-terrorists are growing fun crops. By the way, that isn't really where the problem lies. It's called fentanyl, and it's manufactured everywhere. Major ingredients coming from China. But ultimately, he's made these sailors and soldiers sign NDAs so no one can find out what's really going on in there. Education, if nothing else, if you go to school and you love the school and you love what's going to class, then you're enhancing something that will stick with you for life. And that's called curiosity. And curiosity well-directed, where you don't sit there and believe everything you're told. If you hear something and you're not sure it's right, please don't just accept what you hear. You have the means today of going into the World Wide Web and collecting several different sources. So you have to cross-check whether it's truth or not by going and digging it up yourself. Education, if you do it right, will give that beautiful curiosity to you. But we have an issue now, and that is that we are in an era where education is no longer cherished. And we also are throwing out students from other countries, not just because we don't want them to pay tuition. We're claiming that they take up spaces that other students need to have. But that's not really what's going on. What's really going on is they're trying to pretend as if the First Amendment only applies to citizens, and that's been brought into question too. In 1945, the United States Supreme Court determined that if you're in the United States, the Supreme Court told us that even foreigners who are temporarily in the United States have the full benefit of the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment just because they're here, because that's the law of the land. It's not the law of the land only for citizens. So the First Amendment is one of the most basic parts of education, the ability to express yourself freely. And I have to tell you, I was a miscreant in law school. There was a professor in law school who was the world's leading expert. I mean, the world's leading expert. He drafted international treaties and statutes on copyright. And he and I would get into debates. I would knowingly go after him. And he loved it. And I enjoyed the debates too, because it basically was dealing with a very, very fine mind. But I now look in here. Education has become profoundly partisan. Let me look at some of the numbers I've got here. Fewer than 38% of Americans 25 and older have earned a Bachelor of Arts or equivalent. And that plateaued a couple of years ago, increasing, well, it went up to there because between 1960 and 2020, we went from a very small percentage of Americans with a college education to that 38% number. So Democrats tend to benefit from people with college educations. That statistic has not fallen on deaf ears in the Republican Party. So if we make sure people don't get an education, we'll have a better shot. It appears that the Democratic share of college graduate vote, 57% in 2020, 56% in 24, even as the share of non-college votes surged from 51 to 56% for Republicans. Meanwhile, non-college voters still make up 57% of the electorate, a figure that rises to 60% in swing states. So you're seeing direct correlations between levels of education and political bias and political proclivities. So if you're a Republican and you say, educated people don't vote for my party, what do you think you're going to do about educational priorities? I mean, right now there are people who are saying, we don't want to forgive any loans whatsoever. You know, you went to a trade school that went bankrupt and you used federal money and you never got a degree. Well, you know what? Screw you. You borrow the money, pay it back. I find all this stuff just completely and totally antithetical to everything that I learned and everything that I valued in my life. I did not have a rich family. I had a very dysfunctional family, and they hated each other so much, they did not want to fund my education, even though they could. So I was just kicked out the door. I remember my father basically gave me a choice. You can go to Westchester State Teachers College for free and sleep on my couch. If you want to go anywhere else, you're on your own. I picked Yale. I don't know why, but I sort of thought that was a good idea at the time. Let's talk a little bit more about all these crazy-ass foreign students that come into the United States and get higher degrees, whether they're graduate, undergraduate, law, business, or whatever. Take a good look. Let's see if I can pull up some names here. I was absolutely floored when I looked at the number of people who were running countries, who were at the top of their own nations, either they're in cabinets or whatever. And the most common background for foreign education for people who have gone on to become prime ministers, foreign ministers, ambassadors, senior leaders in their respective countries has been the United States. The second greatest place is the United Kingdom, which is where we got our notion of how education is structured and what we do. That's ridiculous. Why do people go to those schools? Because we're famous for having the most comprehensive background, most comprehensive studies, whether it's law or history or medicine or engineering, doesn't matter what it is. We have modern equipment in STEM subjects. We have amazing access. I remember once when I went to a little get-together in my residential college at Yale, we gathered around the room and we talked to this guy who dropped in to talk to 50 of us. His name was Henry Kissinger. He was Secretary of State. I can't tell you how much fun it is. I went to a friend of mine who was the funny story, he had me tag along with him as he ran for office in Bangkok to become a member of parliament. And God only knows, a few years later, he emerged as a foreign minister, like Secretary of State. I remember arriving once in Bangkok. I was going to visit him, among other things that I had to do in Bangkok. And I'm sitting in the airplane, And the door opens, and these uniformed officers, police officers, walked in there. Is there a Peter Dekom in here? And I'm going, I'm going to prison for something I didn't do. So I feebly raised my hand, and they said, come with us. So I'm going off the airplane. They've actually pulled down a ladder. I mean, one of those, whatever they call those things where you get off the aircraft. And I got off, and there was a big black stretch limo waiting for me. And I'm looking very puzzled. I looked at what's going on, and I said, what is this? He said, your friend offered you a car, a lift into your hotel. Kante Suphamongkhong, if you could pronounce the name, he was the foreign minister at the time. So I'm looking around. I'm not used to this at all. I said, but what about my luggage? It's in the car. Okay. So we get in the car, and I have to tell you, Bangkok traffic is absolutely awful, but I enjoyed a snail's pace in a very nice limousine to my hotel. And Khan was just absolutely a terrific host. Years later, when he was part of the Thaksin regime, when they were thrown out of office, he was in France, and they sent him a note saying, don't bother to come back. So he wound up being the Regent Scholar at UCLA, which is the highest academic position in the entire UC system. And he invited me to join him once. And I said, oh, okay. So I went to his class. It was a really interesting class. And he said, come over to the faculty center and have lunch with us. So I did. And he sat me down next to this really interesting dude. I mean, he was smart. We were bantering back and forth on world politics, subjects that I love and near and dear. I later asked Khan, who was this guy? I love him. He said, oh, he's the president of Peru. Okay. These people come to the United States to get educated, and no matter what their ultimate positions in other countries may be, they carry an understanding of American and American values with them. And those universities have educated people from other countries for a very, very long time, and we have benefited amazingly by that reality. We have people on the other side who understand who Americans are. They know what Thanksgiving is. They've had a turkey or something. They've gone through Christmas. They've gone through the 4th of July. They understand Memorial Day. They've done it all, and they know who we are. They know what football is. They know that a receiver isn't necessarily a bankruptcy term. It may have something to do with American football. They don't call it football, American football. Soccer is what we call football, but that's the way it goes. So these people, these policymakers for the countries, no matter how diabolically opposed they may seem, there's a way to reach them with an undercurrent of what I call soft power or diplomacy, based on the commonality of going to school with people. Whether you're the president of Mexico or whether you've gone, whatever you are, if you have gone to an American or a British university, you are influenced by the culture that you came from. And that culture creates bonds and allows us to negotiate treaties and advance our interests globally, because these people aren't foreigners. They're kind of people who lived overseas, who came to the United States, and you watch some of these people speaking English, and I would die to speak a foreign language with that level of fluency, but they're brilliant. They're wonderful. So let's see, the United States, 67 of serving world leaders have actually been educated in American universities. That's staggering to me. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Then secondly, it's the lovely UK, as I mentioned. Then it's France. There are 19 world leaders who have no higher education of any sort, whether in their own country or abroad. But basically what we've got here, we have a connective tissue that we don't want to lose. We want these people to come to the United States. We want them to come and help and learn our culture so that we can share a future together based on commonality of experience and knowledge. We really actually need to have something called diversity. Diversity isn't our enemy. Diversity is our sense of power. What you hear is people basically telling you, well, DEI is a bad thing. DEI run rampant is a bad thing. But DEI trying to balance fairness and also bring people of different cultures and experiences and educational levels together is an amazingly good thing. So now we have a reality that someone woke up in the Trump administration and said, you know what? We need to take over the academic programs and the student criteria, the admissions programs of every great American university. Let's start with Harvard. I'm glad Harvard had their lightning rod higher than Yale, because Yale doesn't seem to get mentioned very much in this terrible effort to decimate our educational stuff. But let's take a look at what some of these are. I mean, I looked at what's going on at Harvard, at UCLA. Those are universities I know pretty well. UCLA, I have my law degree from there. And it's really very strange that we've lost 20% of our foreign student body right now. That's the reality that we went from January 20th of this year to present. We've lost 20% of our students. And the excuse, and I got to say here, I wrote a blog about this a couple of years ago, and it said, anti-Semitism is a problem. It's not an excuse. I have what you have got is some of the most anti-Semitic people on planet Earth working in the Trump administration, using anti-Semitism as an excuse to govern universities all across the land. And all you have to say, you criticize Israel. I got bad news for Israel. The vast majority of young American Jews are not just rubber stamping Netanyahu's efforts in Gaza. They're pissed. And they very well may grow up to take over this country, assuming we still have elections. They're going to take over this country, and they are going to remember the visions of their youth of Gaza being decimated, babies starving, being blown to bits. And if you think they're going to vote to authorize munitions and support for Israel, you're wrong. It ain't going to happen. And that's a shame, because Israel has a very powerful reason to exist. It also offers the world a massive amount of engineering and technological expertise. The ability to take what Israel has developed and spread it throughout the Middle East would make the Middle East a very, very, very successful part of the world. There's not a reason in the world why that knowledge can't be shared. And you may not know this, but back in the early 70s, 60s and 70s, Israel and Iran were best friends. Huh? Yeah, it was in 1979, the theocracy took over, and you know what? That was kind of like, oh, well, we're going to have to get rid of all these Jews, and we have to drive Israel into the sea. And, I understand why white people, and I actually lived in that part of the world. I saw the refugee camps, etc. But I'm looking at what Israel can offer the world today. And I have to tell you, it's a really, really, really good thing. If only we stop killing people and we start basically taking their brains to capacity and share the knowledge and share the expertise, we do become a vastly better place. There's an expression I like to use from time immemorial, and that's from a 19th century Spanish philosopher named George Santayana, although actually I believe Polybius in ancient Greece had the same idea. This is the translation from Spanish to English. Those who do not study the past are condemned to repeat its mistakes. Kind of makes sense. Even though, as you know, or if you remember from my opening podcast, I don't believe in a perfectly circular vision of history. I see history as sort of having some circularity to it. But every time something monumental hits, like climate change, atomic bomb, the internet, World War II, that tilts the entire spiral, not a circle, but it tilts the spiral of change. We tend to go back and repeat mistakes, but the overall reality of our culture is a spiral. But if you don't study the vectors, the curves, the lessons of the past, you're going to make stupid mistakes. And we're in the middle of a major use of anti-Semitism as a tool to control universities, businesses, government, when the people who are using that excuse don't believe a word of anti-Semitism. They're quite prepared to do it. Anti-Semitism has no place whatsoever in an American educational system or culture, and it's not appropriate to sit there and use it as an excuse. It doesn't help people who are Jews, because people who believe that excuse is being used to punish them are going to hate Jews even more. It doesn't accomplish what you want it to do. It's also funny that anti-Semitism was being used to take over universities like Harvard and Brown and Columbia, etc. When you had to take a look at who's president of those universities, they were all Jews. So it's very strange that we pick that as the issue that is going to define why we need to take over higher education, why the Trump administration wants to look at the social media posts of students, why it wants to control which foreign students come into the United States. By the way, let's assume we have an anti-American student coming to the United States and sitting there and hanging out with Americans for weekends, for parties, having meals at the Commons, whatever it is. That anti-Americanism dissipates. However much it does dissipate. And there is a connective tissue that doesn't go away. I can't even begin to tell you how important it is for us to have different people from different countries come to the United States and share their experiences growing up in their lands. And nothing does that better than a university. I mean, I remember there were so many foreign students. We sit around the table for lunch or dinner at my school, and they were talking about what their life was like, how they lived in the other country, what things about the United States they found fascinating, what things they found disgusting, some of which I shared. But ultimately what they did is they brought their culture to me. I didn't have to pay extra for it. It was part of the elective process of putting foreign students in the same place that I was. And I loved it. I mean, I find that to be as much as a part of the educational process as going to class. The other thing that happens is when you start throwing out funding programs for research, like cancer research, nuclear physics, computer programs, and you cut those funds because the universities aren't doing what you want them to do. They're not teaching history the way you want it taught. They're admitting students you would never admit. They're trying to control every part of it. And so what they're doing is they're punishing you by cutting your funding for research. That's really a smart thing to do. So we can find out that Tylenol causes autism, so we can find out all kinds of wonderful stuff, which is bullcrap. I want to know what the truth is. So here you have these university professors with tens of millions of dollars of equipment they couldn't get in their home countries. And they're getting this equipment to use for medical research, for nuclear research, for energy, all the things that are going on. And they can't use that equipment if they're tossed out. So all of a sudden, a lot of other countries said, the United States is throwing out people who are among the most gifted, intelligent human beings in some of the most vital areas where we need research. Maybe we should offer them the same kind of stuff. That equipment isn't really that expensive. We can do it. And China, which had been sort of behind the curve for many, many years when it came to this kind of technology, said, guess what, you American professors? We have the same stuff you had in the United States, only we upgraded it to you, and we're ready to offer it to you if you come to us and finish your education here in China or Hong Kong. That's also true in Europe. Canada, Ontario, has lured away a whole bunch of our researchers to get their degrees in Canada, and when they graduate, they ask them to stay. That's what we used to do. When we had these brilliant people getting their PhDs and all kinds of scientific achievements or economics or whatever other valuable lesson there is, we were really happy about that. We would keep them. If you had that kind of college degree, you would be able to emigrate and get a green card very easily. Not so easy anymore. There's so many researchers leaving the United States and American universities and moving to England and Canada that American companies that desperately depend on that research are relocating their research facilities in those other countries. So when those people go out in those new jobs in research, all of those wonderful inventions and creative stuff that they've done at university and later in the companies in those other countries, that doesn't come to create American jobs. That comes to create jobs in Canada and China and England and Europe and other places. Let me just say something that is at the core of all of this analysis. The greatest job creator in the United States is not a tax cut. Tax cuts are a waste of time and waste of money. If you want to create jobs, educate people, whether they're learn in trade school or whether they learn in universities with amazing equipment or have a major research capacity. It doesn't happen without education. And I will tell you that most Americans will believe that their children will not live at the same quality of life as they have lived. That's ridiculous. What do we call that? I think it's called upward mobility. It died. It's now relegated to the American history books. If there's upward mobility, it's in China. It's in other countries. It's in India. It's not here. Why do we do that to ourselves? And it really comes right smack down to the reality. We don't treasure education. If we don't treasure it and others do, and we live in an unbelievably complicated, globally competitive universe, and we're no longer able to create those wonderful products that we do. Remember, if you look at manufacturing, which is very interesting that that's a high priority for us, manufacturing accounts for less than 10% of our entire economy. Agriculture, less than 2%. But most of our non-governmental positions, not military positions, are coming from service and technology. And we are throwing those people out. We're limiting our choice. Wouldn't you think that if you could pick the smartest people in the world and populate your research facilities and your universities with those people and grow your economy and grow your upward mobility better than anyone else in the world, wouldn't you choose to do that? But then it comes back to the simple realization that it turns out that people who are educated tend not to vote Republican, and Republicans are in office, so what do they do? We start looking at universities like Brown paying $50 million, UCLA, which is currently out there, they got a freeze of $339 million in medical and science grant freezes from the administration. And they're trying to negotiate how to release these funds, which go to benefit every American. They go to benefit the government. They should pour more money into research. But instead, these universities are saying, well, we'll do some nice stuff and we'll eliminate DEI. We won't have quotas for people admitted, and we'll try to cut back on the number of international students that we have, and we'll continue to help the United States unravel. We'll have the United States continue not to have the best and the brightest in the world. We'll let other countries get the best and the brightest. We'll sit back there and forget about the idea of mixing our basic understanding of life, technology, everything else, because we don't want to be woke. Woke. That word pisses me off. I'm sorry. I like you, instead of using a label like woke and blaming people for everything that's wrong. Woke, basically, I tried to figure out what it meant, and I figured out what it means. It's whatever conservatives don't like. So if they find something they don't like, they call it woke, and that's enough. Just the label alone is enough to kill it. I hate labels. I like to find out what people are really about. Now let's go to the UCLA settlement. This is an interesting thing. You don't see this because you're not video, but all of this is being video taped. I have this massive document that's I don't know how many pages it is here. It goes on forever. And it's a draft. It's at least, 25, 30 pages long. And it's a draft of the resolution between the United States of America and UCLA. And it's all about that $339 million worth of research money, and also the pledge of the Trump administration that if you let us control your curriculum, control who your students are, get their social media, and basically let us tell you what we don't allow, we'll give you more research money. That doesn't seem like a good invitation. Sell us your soul and we'll give you a meal. I don't like this at all. I would like to think that those of you out there with any choice in the matter would probably like to live in a country where we once again strive to be the best, the brightest, and the most competitive on the planet. I'm damn sick and tired of America handing all this crap to China. It says, here's wealth, here's power, take it. We don't want it. We're idiots. We're self-destructing. My belief is educate as many people as you can. It ain't just about college. Community colleges are just as valuable if you're good at what you do, whatever your craft may be. It's all good. What's not good is making education unaffordable. We have increased the cost of education at literally the triple the annual cost of living increase from the 1960s all the way into the present. And we're saddling students with ridiculous loans that just don't make any sense whatsoever. So I'm going to ask all of you, think about it. Think about what you can do to help the world accept education as a benefit and not a detriment. Care about what we learn and that we have people who know what they're doing. And stop outsourcing and putting toxic labels on things as opposed to trying to learn what's really going on. And let's really make America great again, because we're going in the wrong direction. That's Peter Dekom. I'm signing off for right now, and I can't wait to talk to you next time. We'll be back with questions right after this. Unbeknownst to all of you out there, I have a very wise group of people backing me up, and one of them is Amanda Fleming, who is purportedly a lawyer and has been practicing for more years than I'm going to say on the air. Very, very bright. And Amanda Fleming has been my producer. A lot of the questions that happen and the voice at the beginning of the podcast is hers. So I'm going to open myself up to being a complete and utter fool and have her ask me questions that relate to past podcasts and questions based upon emails received from my listeners.
Okay, my first question is about today's episode.
I'm having one right now.
Okay, please reconcile a person's goal of disrupting our education system with his or her personal need for professionals such as doctors, scientists, accountants, attorneys, nurses in daily life.
We have a very complicated reality and a love-hate relationship with the First Amendment. The reality, people who try to disrupt the activities of others need to be somehow contained to let those who choose to pursue their education without that disruption. Not that there isn't a place for disruption, not that there isn't a place for objections, but things have not gotten so bad that you want to burn it all down. Therefore, people who want to burn it all down don't help solve the problem. You know, it's great to destroy a system. I'm always somebody who looks for solutions. First of all, people need to be heard. They need to have the right to express themselves. They need to have the right to do that in a form where they are safe to express it. And they have the right, basically, to do whatever they need without disrupting the lives of others. Sometimes, I guess if you wind up at a university where Hitler has taken over the country, disruption may have a place. We're not there yet. We're getting there. We might get there soon enough, but we're not there yet.
Could you please make a case for free college education?
Well, for me, it's a very simple situation. We're using money as a filtration device, whereas in the 1950s and 60s, we used academic qualification as a filtration device. Affording education is not something that we should do. It's not the gatekeeper that's appropriate for the country. Let's be selfish. What's best for the country? Good education, well-educated people. But most people don't want to pay higher taxes to pay for the educational systems that will create those people. That said, isn't public education socialism? We're giving kids, elementary school, middle school or junior high school, and we're paying for it? That's socialism. Bullshit. Socialism is where the government owns the mechanisms that provide production, have value. It has nothing to do with social programs. The only common word in that is social. It's a question of priority. Germany, for example, if you're an American and you go to Germany right now, you can take courses in English. There are 1,100 courses like that in Germany. And you can get an academic degree, and it's a wonderful degree, and you have wonderful professors, and the courses are taught in English. And you know what you pay? Tuition-free books and miscellaneous may cost you $500 a year. I mean, I find that to be compelling. We need to have what state universities and state colleges used to provide, which is a free education to their residents and perhaps to other very qualified individuals. This idea that you have to have money to be educated is basically sort of going right into that Donald Trump perception They're winners and losers. Winners have money, losers are everybody else. That doesn't work. You can't grow your country and your economy and your success and be competitive unless you have the best and the brightest doing what they can do better than anyone else. And you can't just have money as the barrier to keep people out when there are really bright people out there who are not getting a shot.
If you were in charge of redesigning the U.S. public education system, what changes would you make? In what ways would you restructure it?
I think the focus has to be on teachers and on teaching systems. We have an absolutely, there's an experiment in Brownsville, Texas, in a school there, where they basically teach everything to each student separately using AI systems designed to teach that course. And their teachers walking around the class, so that some student is stuck, they take that student aside and say, all right, let's get you unstuck. Because math is the simplest course you could ever take because there's a right or wrong answer for most of it until you get into, quantum physics. And the reality is most people do badly in math because one teacher, one moment, blew it and turned them off to math. And the minute you take a link out of a chain, that chain falls apart. So what I would basically do is say, let's use AI to individualize the education. And let's use our teachers as advisors. Let them have what they need to get it done. And let's make classrooms so manageable. By the way, the school teaches everything they teach at a basic level at every elementary school in the state in 2 to 3 hours. And the afternoons are open for activities which, the students design. They may decide to build something. They may decide to research something, may decide to paint something. Whatever it is, their education is taken care of. In China, there is a high school, an experiment going on, where instead of using Mandarin as the language of classrooms, the language is mathematics. And these kids are just creating stuff that's scary. And I really would like to see us take each one of our American students and cherish them. We're dumping them into shitholes with rodents, bad schools, hot. We have people taking active shooter drills. Come on, guys, this is not education. Let's cherish our students and cherish our teachers, and everything else is tertiary or worse.
What should teacher salaries be?
Well, probably more than a garbage collector. There are garbage collectors right now who are making $20,000 to $30,000 a year more than what teachers are paid. And I think part of what we should also offer teachers, if they wish to pursue graduate educations in their particular field, we should provide it and pay for it. Teachers are cherished, but that also doesn't mean all people are great teachers. And part of the system of improving our educational, climate is to say, okay, teachers, if you can't teach your class and you screw it up 3 years in a row, we might be able to get rid of you, no matter what your union says. At some point, the union has to accept the fact that the priority is not protecting teacher tenure, but protecting students' education. And teachers who are able to educate, and you give them a long time. You give them input, you let them know where they're weak, etc. But if they can't cut it 3 years in a row, next. I hear thinking going on, wheels turning. I'm terrified.
Well, you touched on my next question. Is going to be how important is the profession of teaching, and how does our regard or lack thereof for teachers impact the quality of education students receive? You kind of touched on it already, but if you have anything else to add.
There's a slogan out there, if you can't do, teach. Bullshit. Some of the best people in the world are dedicated to the exciting moment. I've taught at a university level at UCLA and Berkeley, and I will tell you that the excitement of watching a student's eyes when the light bulb goes off, wow, that is such a high. I so love it. And I remember actually stepping into high school classes just on an occasional basis. And you look at the kids there, and most of their eyes glass over. My job is to wake you up and get you interested. And that is something that I think teachers need to learn to do. If you can't entertain your class, if you can't keep their eyes glued on to what needs to be done, and if kids are allowed to slide into oblivion and get lost in the system, it's not they have failed. We failed them.
Okay, I know you're a lawyer, but first and foremost, you are a forever student. Why?
Um, I've always been attracted to learning. Um, I've always found it spectacular. And when the rigid structure of college was in my past, I started reading vociferously. I taught myself Chinese history. I read 100 books in Chinese history. I taught myself all kinds of things through travel. And books aren't the only source of education. Take a trip, only instead of going to what you think are the usual places, try to figure out what the life of the people where you're visiting, what is it like? I have a friend of mine who was in the Peace Corps in the 1970s, and he lived in Uruguay. And today, Uruguay is one of the most pleasant places to live on planet Earth. Their leaders don't have limousines. They don't live in mansions. Everybody lives a good life. There's no poverty there, virtually nothing. It's a stable country. They don't have all the craziness of the other Latin countries. And the reality is, a trip to Uruguay taught him a lot. What could a trip somewhere that you've never been teach you? And if you're curious, and I find that, certain people just like to go hiking. That's great. But where are you hiking? What are you looking at? What are you learning on the hike? I just want to observe. I'm a fact freak. Maybe I can't explain myself that well, but I love learning stuff. To this day, when I write my blogs, when I do the podcast, I'm going to school. I'm learning stuff. I don't want to give you second-rate information. So I go and make sure that what I'm saying has a basis, more than one basis, in research that I personally conduct. There isn't anybody else doing it, and I haven't relegated this to AI. AI may aid me in research, but if I find a fact, I want to know that it's not a hallucination. I want to know where it came from and what other sources will be relevant to understand that. And that's part of learning. Skepticism, passion, and curiosity. They're all fun.
Okay, for an 18-year-old right now who's trying to make the decision to go to college or not, with all the factors that are at play right now, including the high cost, how could you help them make that decision or weigh the pros and cons?
First of all, I want to know who you are. What do you do for hobbies? What kind of movies do you see? What do you watch on television? What do you see in social media? Who are your favorite places to go on social media? And what would you like to be if you had infinite power to design yourself so that you could be, where would you be in 5 or 10 years? Tell me those things. Maybe you would be best going to a trade school. Maybe you would be best joining the military. Maybe you could go somewhere and be an apprentice somewhere. Maybe you just go to another country and live for a while. Maybe you go to college. And one of the other things that I find fascinating is people will look at state college tuition and they will say to their brilliant student in high school, well, I can't afford to send you anywhere. I'm going to send you to the local junior college. Let me tell you something. Unless Trump destroys the entire Ivy League or the equivalent with Georgetown, Duke, Stanford, their University of Washington, Washington Lee, all kinds of great schools, they probably will pay for you to go to that school and absorb a lot of tuition if you're good enough. It'll be much cheaper than the cheapest state school you could go to. Look at what's possible. Believe in yourself and challenge yourself. If you need to reach a little bit above what you think your capacity is, capacity will actually provide the reach for you.
What is Trump currently doing in regards to climate change that is causing you a concern?
Getting up in the morning. Okay. But look, we all should know that warming water causes amazing disasters. If you don't believe me, look at what just happened in, Jamaica. And that's water temperature rising. And what happens if you say climate change isn't real, it's a hoax? It's terrible. But it's even worse when you use your tariff power and you go to other countries, as Trump is doing it. He is going to countries that do not want to have reliance on fossil fuels and convincing them that that's the only way they can go and they should buy our American fossil fuels. And I don't know how to break this to everybody, But even with all the alternative energy we have in the world, we're burning 1.5% more fossil fuels than we did in the past. We're at a record consumption level of fossil fuels. And strangely enough, the country that's doing the most to combat fossil fuel greenhouse emissions is China. Not that they're good people. They got lots of coal, but they're shutting them down. They deploy more alternative energy systems in their world, including those turbines that Trump claimed they never used. They use them like crazy. Solar, geothermal, hydropower, and even an improved version of nuclear power, which Bill Gates is beginning to work on. All those things are providing energy and jobs. If you're an idiot, you're going to go work in the oil fields anywhere because that's it. Go work in a coal mine. Oh, you can't find a job there. Why? Because the world doesn't want coal. The world doesn't want petroleum. Even Saudi Arabia, big fossil fuel place, look where they're putting their money. They're trying to build energy systems to power AI, basically, which sucks up power like nobody's business. And they're saying, come to us. In the meantime, they're sending their students, their kids, into those systems to get educated so they can replace a really obsolete industry. Fossil fuel is obsolete. It's yesterday's news. It's not the future. It's the past. So if you want to train people to do stuff that was and will never be a growth industry, that's where you go. Look at the little countries in the world, the small countries who are saying, you mean I don't actually have to import fossil fuels to fuel my little teeny country? I could do it all with much cheaper solar and wind power. I could use tides, and I wouldn't be dependent on those big, ugly-ass foreign fossil fuel makers to provide me with fossil fuels. Wow! And then there's the United States. Trump is doing everything he can to undo that philosophy, telling countries that if that's what you do, we will punish you with tariffs. Tariffs are not a punishment. We go into that another time. Tariffs are supposed to be a means of controlling trade that is reasonable for the circumstances. We don't have that. We'll get into that eventually, I'm sure. I'll get crucified on that one too. But you know what? I really hate that we're the only major country in the world where we think climate change is a hoax. There is no hoax in the hurricanes we've experienced. By the way, we're not having more hurricanes, but the ones we're having are vastly more intense, much heavier, as I've explained in earlier podcasts, and they cause vastly more destruction. If you think that's going to get better, then maybe you should move to a place where you can only get wildfires. Oops, no. How about drought? No, we don't want to go there. Maybe we'll go to a city where the temperature is killing people because they can't live in the. Oh, no, that's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to bet on the past. If you think making America great again has something to do with picking up the worst habits we ever had in our history, okay, you get what you deserve, but then you're shoving it on me and all my friends and children, etc., and I don't want you to do that. In that case, I'll talk to you all next time. If you believe in pod, believe in mine. Podcasts. Bye.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at dekompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.